Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people over on Patreon. Amazing people such as Charles M., Eric H., Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Gilmer, Stephen P., and Mr. Biscuits have been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out all there is to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, do you even blast process, bro? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, I have a wonderful guest that I get to speak with. We are going to be talking about his upcoming YouTube series, one that has actually been going on his Twitch for quite some time now. Joining me today to discuss all things Sega, the Genesis, and otherwise is my good friend G from G to the Next Level. G, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic as well. Thank you for coming back on the show. You have been on, this is your third appearance, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. You did the Sega Master System episode with me, and then you also did the original Sonic the Hedgehog. So welcome back to the show.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. You know me. I'm always down to talk Sega.
Oh, it's funny, too. That Master System episode, it was so random. But there was a guy, I'm going to see if I can look it up quick on my phone while I'm chatting here. He's a DJ and it's like J57. What's this dude? Yeah, J57 Music. He's like a hip hop DJ or not DJ. I'm sorry. He's a music producer, not a DJ. And he heard our episode and really liked it. And like followed me on Instagram, and he'll like randomly DM me about Sega Master System things. It was kind of crazy.
Ooh, that's the thing about Master System is like, it might not be the most popular Sega console out there, but I feel that Master System fans are some of the most dedicated and some of the most hardcore out of all the Sega fans. I mean, across all consoles, I feel they are, especially overseas and in Brazil, where the Master System was king. But we talked about that.
we did, and yeah, I mean, you're right, and I feel like that's definitely a trait with a lot of Sega fans in general, which we'll kind of get into a little bit as to maybe why that is as we as we go through our conversation. But this is like you're my second guest to do this kind of more. It's like kind of like we're talking about your YouTube series that you're working on currently and that you've been working through on Twitch and everything as well. But like also it's kind of like a kind of casual conversation. So I'm looking forward to this. We're going to see where the conversation goes. But to start off, to kick off our conversation, I wanted to ask you specifically about your series, Growing Up Genesis, and what exactly is Growing Up Genesis?
Okay, so Growing Up Genesis is a celebration of all things about the Sega Genesis chronologically from A to Z. So we're going from beginning to end, from start to finish. And it started off as something because the Sega Genesis has always been my favorite console of all time. It will always be my favorite console of all time. Ever since starting off with Sega in the arcades with my dad, and then bringing those arcade experience home, the Genesis was the one. And then when I decided to collect for a full set, for a full United States retail set, and I managed to get that, I started to think of other ways to really commemorate my love for the Genesis and really share it out with anybody. Because even though the Genesis is Sega's most popular console, arguably, but it's their most popular console, you do still feel that there really aren't as many Genesis-centric creators or streamers out there. And I kind of wanted to make a difference as, I've been doing YouTube now for about 6 years. And just trying to figure out a way to kind of centralize the channel, but not put yourself directly into a box, right? Yeah. But it's like two things that people come to me for. Like, what do they know G for? The two things that they know me for, Sega and Sonic. Those are the two things that people know me for. So like, you know what? Why don't we start doing that? And so when I started streaming on Twitch, I realized some of the most popular streams and people have get good feedback from people saying that they love is when I cover obscure Genesis stuff. Like games
Mm.
that they had never heard of, or ones that they realized, oh wait, I didn't know that was on Genesis. Like, yeah. So that's when I decided, why don't we do the entire library from A to Z? And it started off with us just starting with the letter A, and then that became a thing. And then I realized, well, you know what? How about we do this? How about as I'm streaming it on Twitch, I make little bite-sized reviews of these games,
Mhm.
doing not only doing it live candidly on stream, but then also putting it in an easy to digest and easy to access YouTube series. So it's an anthology archive series. So it'll be done by letter. So it'll be the letter A and the letter B and the letter C. And it'll be just real short, quick fire reviews from like 1 to 5 Gs, as I call it, instead of stars. So 1 to 5 Gs. And so yeah, and the Twitch series just it has grown tremendously, like tremendously. I do it every Sunday and Monday, sometimes Tuesdays, and it's just grown tremendously. It's grown the channel tremendously, and I'm hoping that that will do the same for it on YouTube. So that way, you don't have to be live if you want to see some of these. It's just bam, it's right there for you. And
Mhm.
provided if all this goes well, the general scope is after Genesis is done and everything goes well, we're going to keep going with more Sega consoles. We're going to do the Master System. We're going to do the Saturn. We're going to do the Dreamcast. Heck, if I can get the means of doing it, we'll even do the Sega Pico because why not? Right?
Dude, Pico is one of my favorite underrated systems that I own I own a Pico in the box. See
Nice.
it
Me
I love
too.
that thing. It's so cool. Anyway, I'm sorry. I could gush about the Pico for well, I did an episode on it. It's only like 20 minutes because it was just me. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Oh, you must have done that before we met because I totally would have joined you for
Dude,
that.
I'm down for a redo. I want to do a redo of a lot of my older episodes now that I've kind of gained a little bit of prowess in this podcasting thing. So if when I inevitably do my redo of Sega Pico, I will have you on.
Heck yeah, I'm down. Especially hopefully by then I can get one of my my Sega collecting white whales, which is the Sega Advanced Pico Bina. I want the Pokemon Pikachu edition Bina. I
Okay.
have been trying to get this thing for literally over a decade now. And not just for me, but also because my wife, Ranchan, she's a huge Pokemon collector. So like it works on both of our ends. The one console out there that is branded with the Nintendo IP. It's such a weird little iota of Sega
It
history,
is.
and I want it so badly. But yeah, if you're down for that, I'm down for that. But
Oh,
yeah,
I'm
that's the whole plan. Now I don't know; they're not going to be all called Growing Up Genesis because obviously, but I'll come up with different titles for like I believe I think we tentatively have the Saturn one called Searching for Saturn.
ooh, I like that.
Searching for all the
Dreaming of
cool things for that,
Dreamcast.
dreaming about the Dreamcast. And we haven't figured out one for Master System yet, but we'll see once we get down to it. But one step at a time. We got to do Genesis
Massacring
first.
Master System. No,
Now,
that's funny.
32X, I've technically already done 32X. So it's
Mm,
like, all right, well, then I could just repurpose that. So that's the whole thing. Once the YouTube series starts, it's going to start with the 32X. I know it's slightly out of order. Well, because I had a whole project about covering every single 32X title.
mhm,
And that also kind of melded into Growing Up Genesis. So it's going to be a little weird. Like that's going to appear first on YouTube before Genesis starts. And then on Twitch,
okay.
32X is going to come after Genesis. So
That
it's a
actually
little confusing, but
that made me I was curious about that. Like, are the 32X and Sega CD games going to be included in Growing Up
I
Genesis?
miss Sega CD. Yes, we are going to do Sega CD, but it's Sega CD. Yes, will be part of Growing Up Genesis
It,
because they all will be growing up because they're
yeah,
add-ons.
it's such a weird. The 32X and Sega CD are so interesting to me, not because of what they are per se. Like I love that they're add-ons, but they're like a combination of being a separate console, but not
Oh
because they're
yeah,
add-on systems. But at the same time, they're completely different systems with different libraries. It's really interesting to me. It's fascinating,
yep.
and I want to ask about something you brought up a little bit before about how you found like it was hard to you felt like you were going to get pigeonholed almost into one type of thing. And I know you've lamented about this before about if you don't cover Sonic, sometimes people get like cranky with you and whatnot.
Yeah, it
Um,
happens sometimes.
people are people, I know. So I was going to ask, how are you going to strike the balance between being like another gaming slash like Sega content creator and then not like how are you going to strike that balance between Sonic and Sega? Which it sounds weird, like you'd think they'd be synonymous, but as you've experienced, sometimes people get mad at you when you don't cover just Sonic.
I think it's just as long. I think the problem will probably correct itself as long as I execute. I think that's really
Mm,
what it is. Like, as long as I consistently am putting out content of both varieties, I think if I start leaning in one direction more than the other, that's when now more so. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm perfectly clear on this. I love and adore the Sonic community. I absolutely do. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. Let's be
mhm.
real, right? But sometimes it happens when you put out something that you've really melded and just like, oh, this is awesome and amazing, and then some of the comments come back saying, okay, well, when's the next Sonic video? I'm like, okay, yeah, I totally, I get it. So I feel that the problem will kind of correct itself as long as I'm consistently making content for both ends. Because even
Mhm.
though yes, there's some crossover, there's still kind of individual fandoms, if that makes sense. There's not
It's
as much
interesting, yeah.
crossover as you think there would be. Now, the thing is that there's also the rest of the retro community, like those who like Nintendo and PlayStation and all of that, that will also fall into growing up Genesis, but might not necessarily fall into Sonic. So I think again, it's just finding a good balance of putting out both, because my two consistent series that are really that I'm going to continue on with, because I also have one other series for YouTube that I haven't talked about it a whole lot, but it's also going to be alongside with Growing Up Genesis. It's also an anthology series, but it's a very short form anthology series, and it's about the Evercade console, because
Okay.
that's been
Mhm.
my collection console of choice. Because I don't really collect video games anymore, unfortunately, because various
Same,
reasons. A, I have
same.
pretty much everything I want, and B, prices are getting really high. So,
Insane. But
yeah.
you were talking about the Sega Pico. I was looking at, what is it? The Sonic the Hedgehog game for the
Yes.
Pico is like over $100 now.
It's gotten, I don't know when, because when I was looking it up, because right, I used to have a loose copy of it. I gave it away to my buddy Jamie from Stuff We Play. I gave it and my original United States Pico, my American Pico. I gave those to her to donate to her channel. And I have a Japanese one complete in box. So, and I
Mhm.
had Tales in the Music Maker in box already. So, and I had a Japanese Sonic the Hedgehog Game World. So when I decided to do, so I did a charity stream for Sonic Pico, for Sonic Game World. I actually did a charity
Mhm.
stream for that. It was an unlock. And so I was trying to get a physical United States copy, and it had been a long time since I had done any research on what the prices were. And I looked at it, I was like, oh good lord, it's over $100 now.
Yeah.
I was like,
I
what? When did this shoot up?
like what and of the Pico, like no offense to the Pico, we both said we love the system, but like it's like I don't consider that like a collector's item. That's
It's
not
really
something
not.
that collectors desire normally, but apparently it is now.
I think it's because of people like me who collect anything Sonic. It's
Mm.
probably what it is. Because Sonic collecting is also on the rise right now. So it's
Mm.
now granted, Sonic fans are eating real good. I mean, like we're getting pretty much everything. Literally the other day, I got a pair of Sonic earbud headphones, like Bluetooth earbud headphones that has like a rotating face on it.
Oh, that's
Sonic's
awesome.
literally everywhere now. So you can get him for pretty much everything. But and I try to look back at some of the stuff, say like in the mid 2000s, the aughts, that was at that time when I wasn't collecting Sonic. I want to go back, like the Sonic and the Black Knight merchandise, particularly that, and they're going for hundreds of dollars each. A two
That's
pack of,
wild.
of Shadow and Silver, a two pack of Shadow and Silver in their night outfits, sold complete in box, $1,400. I'm not joking. I am not joking. I was like, what? Goodness. So,
That's
yeah,
ludicrous. Oh
yeah.
my
So
goodness.
that's one of the reasons why, right? But with the Evercade, going back to that though, because I'm calling it Everlasting the Evercade. Notice this: Growing Up Genesis, Everlasting the Evercade. I have a 3-word thing going, but
Alliteration a little bit too. The starting
yep.
with, I like it.
Yep, exactly. And so, but unlike Growing Up Genesis, which is going to be a little bit more long form, Evercade is going to be completely quick, because every cartridge for the Evercade is a multi game cartridge except for one. There's one cartridge that has one game on it, but everyone has multiple. So they're going to be super quick. Maybe do 2 compilations at a time and just do them in numerical order. Growing Up Genesis alphabetical order, Everlasting Evercade is numerical order. So that way I can pump them out quickly. And so that way everybody gets a little bit of something, right? It's what I've always really wanted to do is I want to be a variety creator, but also be known for something. You get what I'm saying? Because you don't want
Hmm.
to do just that one thing by yourself, but you also understand that I found, and this is just my own personal opinion, right? Like I found that we've kind of gotten into a stage where basically when we watch stuff on YouTube and Twitch, our desires to look for something new are starting to become less and less. People are going to find that one particular creator that they know for this one thing that they found them for, and that's it. And whenever they move into something else, they're not really interested in that. But at the
Mm,
same time, so if you keep your own variety within that, so that's why it's to me, it's better to be a Sega slash retro creator than to focus solely on Sonic
mhm.
because like there's a lot more. I mean, granted, I can definitely be proven wrong by this. I've seen some Sonic creators get real creative, which is awesome. But there's a lot more that I can do. And even with just that, like say if I do finish Sega, what's to stop me from doing PlayStation or Nintendo
Exactly.
after that, right?
It's a cron gaming project as some there's other cron gaming YouTubers, but I like your version of it where it's kind of a little bite size. Also, the fact that you have a Twitch side to it, like you can if people want to follow along, they can watch you on Twitch, twitch.tv/. G to the next level,
Hey.
um, and you they can watch you along. They can watch along with you, excuse me, while you work through the series, and then if they want to relive some of it, they can obviously go back to your YouTube channel and watch it once it's up there. Now, I want to ask because we've talked about the series in general and some of the aspects of being a content creator, but let's bring it back a little bit earlier, right? Let's talk about how you first got into the Sega Genesis and like your Sega memories and like you're getting into gaming and Sega and all that other stuff. Like, what are your earliest memories for it? When did you first play the Genesis? All that good stuff.
Oh man. Yep. So it all started way back when, like in the late 80s, like early 90s, because so my dad and I used to play games together a lot. He doesn't really play games anymore, but we used to play video games together a lot. When we were growing up, there was a bowling alley that he was part of a bowling league at. He and my mom were part of a bowling league,
Hmm.
and he would give me and my sister like about $10, which back then was a lot of money to
That's
spend
a
in an
lot. Like,
arcade.
I
Ten
mean, I
bucks is a
wouldn't
lot
give
to
my
spend in an
kid ten
arcade.
bucks now. I'm like,
So yeah, they gave us $10 each to go play in the arcade. And the funny thing is that this arcade either must have like the owner must have loved Sega or they must have had some contract with Sega because they had literally all the heavy hitters. They had everything there. They had Altered Beast, they had Shinobi, they had Outrun, they had Space Harrier, they had everything. I think at one point they even had the Moonwalker arcade game, but I think that might have
okay.
been like past when I stopped going there. But I think they did get the Moonwalker arcade game later. But yeah, they had literally everything. And so, and my dad, after their games were done, he would come play with me. And so we had already gotten familiar with that. Now, fast forward to home consoles, right? So we already had the Atari 5200 and the NES before that. So when it was time, 1991. So when it was time to upgrade to go to the next console, and my parents are kind of apprehensive because they were like, oh, well, you still have the NES and there's still all kinds of games you want for it. But then once my dad saw that, oh, I know these games, I know Altered Beast, I know Outrun, like I know these. And then there was a little blue hedgehog that, little 10-year-old me wouldn't shut up about. And it was just like, I want Sonic, I want Sonic. And then it was just like, yep. And so we remember we were at Toys R Us looking at it, and we were looking at all the games on the shelf, and my mom realized that there was a Arnold Palmer's tournament golf game. My dad's a
Okay.
golfer. My dad is a golfer, and so he saw that. It's like, wait, what? There's an Arnold Palmer tournament golf game? He's like, yeah. Okay, we will consider this, son. And so, sure enough, Christmas 1991. That was no, it wasn't my first time playing on a Genesis because I played it at the kiosks in the stores. Those are really my first real experiences of actually playing it there. But my first sit down time with the Sega Genesis was Christmas 1991, and the first game, even though Altered Beast was the pack in, the first game that I popped in my Genesis was Sonic the Hedgehog. So that
Mm.
was the very first one, and that was just an entire 2 or 3 days of goodness. Because that one Christmas day, we got Altered Beast, Outrun, Arnold Palmer's Tournament Golf, and Sonic.
That now, did you ever play Arnold Palm? Oh my gosh, Arnold Palmer's golf
It's a
while
hard word to
drinking
say,
Arnold
isn't
Palmer's?
it?
It's a tongue twister. I never would have expected. Did you ever play the golf game while drinking Arnold Palmer's?
Oh, I did that on stream in
Oh,
the A
there
to
we go.
Z.
See,
In the
everyone,
A
you
to
gotta
Z, I
go
did that.
check out his stream. That's what I'm saying.
It's such a good game too.
I
It's a shockingly great golf game.
You know what? I should really maybe I should do a series on my show of like unexpectedly good sports games because
Oh,
I never I sports games are so I think I've only done one episode on sports games in general, and it was hockey games, like general hockey games. Like I
Mhm.
had a guest on who's Pat Hickey Jr. Shout out to him. He writes a lot of books on game history, and he's a big hockey fan. So I'm like, this would be a perfect thing to talk about. But I haven't really done anything since. It might be fun just to do like golf month and
Heck yeah.
have and of course have at least one Mario Golf game. But actually, I would probably separate that out from, I don't know, I'm just spitballing ideas at this point.
Oh,
But
I've got a soft spot for like the arcade style retro sports games, especially
yeah,
baseball. I love retro baseball games, like with a deep, deep passion. I love them. So
I
now,
wish
what's funny is just that you might have recently caught a golf game or so that you loved. What's funny about me is that I recently caught some sports games on the Genesis that they're not good. I
no.
found one was like, oh, this is really bad. I found one in the A to Z that actually wound up just being like, this is appalling. It's Chi Chi's Pro Challenge Golf. And I was
Chi
like, oh
Chi's?
man, Chi Chi Rodriguez?
No.
Yeah, he had a golf game named after him. And oh my lord, is it bad? I was like, oof. So
That's kind of a
it's weird because like you'll find that many people, again going into the collecting aspect, that people just toss away sports games. It's like, oh, it's sports games, they don't matter. And I was just like, excuse me, there's some really, really excellent sports games out there, especially on the Neo Geo. Like out of like
mm,
any console at all, Neo Geo sports games are just there's some amazing titles. Like Big Tournament Golf / Neo Turf Masters. That's it's all about retro golf games. Boom.
I mean,
But then Arnold Palmer, going back into that, Arnold Palmer is a fantastic one. Pebble Beach Golf Links is great. There's one for the Mega Drive in Japan called Devil's Course, which is kind of a mad. It's from the team who did Pebble Beach Golf Links, but instead of it being like a realistic golf game, there's like volcanoes on the course and there's like tornadoes. Just wait, what?
I feel
It's just so cool.
sports games, like retro sports games specifically, like I'm thinking prior to like 2003-ish, give or take 2 or 3 years, and before, they actually had like they had a lot more fun with it. Like I remember my buddy had Madden like 2001 or Madden 2000 for like,
Hmm.
this is a Madden game. You'd think it's like the hyper sim game. No, 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 no. And like that game, there was big head mode, there was
Yep.
transporting sidelines, there was like zero gravity. So if you decided to jump with a player or throw the ball, it would go like miles into the sky.
Yep.
Or there was no out of bounds, so you would just warp to other sides of the field and stuff like that. Like, and that was in a Madden game. Like I miss the days when you could have like goofy, weird shit like that.
Yep.
Like that
And
was
almost all of
so
it
good.
because of NBA Jam. And like NBA Jam was the game that changed the game.
Is it the
Literally.
shoes? Puts up a brick.
Big
Um,
shout out to Tim Kitzrow. He's on fire.
he
Yeah,
was
that's awesome.
actually at Retro World Expo last year.
Mhm.
I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but I saw him there.
Oh yeah,
He
he
was
and I
a
have
cool dude.
talked quite often. He's so cool. Like because we've guested at conventions. Because one year I was a guest at Classic Game Fest. His
Mm.
table was literally right next to me. That was my first time meeting him, and so we got a chance to talk a lot over the weekend. He's so cool.
Seems like a good dude, man. He seems really fun. What I was going to ask though, so currently, we're recording this the end of March. This will be out in the end of April. What letter of Growing Up Genesis are you up to now?
So as of today, we're wrapping up the letter H. We've got one game left in the letter H, and then on April Fool's Day, we're doing the entire letter I in one stream because there's only
Oh,
nine. There's only 9 games, and not many of them are good. So we're just gonna. It's an April Fool's special. Like the letter I, we're plowing through the entire letter I. So by the time this video drops or this podcast drops, I should be in the letter J. I
okay.
should be in the. I might be in K because there's not that many games in the letter J either. But there's some good games in J though. But yeah,
So,
but yeah, we should be in the letter J by then.
so then out of the games you've covered so far, what's one that surprised you that you enjoyed, and what's one that disappointed you?
Oh man, probably the biggest surprise of how good, and it might be a little tiny bit of recency bias, but well, no, because this was one that like I really liked as a kid, but then when I played it, like, and I sat down and I experienced the whole thing and it's part of the A to Z, Crusader Ascenti. That's
Okay.
probably one of the ones that really shocked me because at first I kind of when I played it when I was a kid because I've had Crusader Ascenti ever since I was a kid. Thank goodness because that game's
Yeah,
insanely
seriously.
expensive now.
Thank God
But
it's on Switch Online now, so I don't have to
yeah,
spend money on it.
and the Genesis Mini too was on that too, which is cool, very cool. But yeah, my thing about that game though is I didn't realize the serious tones that that story really has, the kind of deep questions that the story gives to you. I'm not going to give it
Mhm.
away, but beyond just how beautiful the game is and the outstanding soundtrack, it's one of those games that like I will see in discourse from many people that people will just palm it off as an average Zelda clone. And to me, I feel that that's really unfair because it's like, yeah, at its core, yes, it does play like The Legend of Zelda. It does. But there's so much more to it, combining the different weapon skills and abilities and using the animals to your advantage, your puzzles, the platforming elements. It's crafted so well. Like this was a game that like I went from okay, I like this to this has become one of my favorite games on the console.
Oh,
And like
that's
I
awesome.
absolutely love it. And then another one that just immediately pops to mind for me right now is Hellfire. Hellfire is another one that surprised me too, and it's a side-scrolling shooter from Toplin, the same team that did Chuck Truck.
Okay.
And so it's another one I played back then, and then I played it now. But because every shmup or shooter has a unique sort of gimmick or a mechanic to it, right? But what I love about Hellfire's mechanic is that there's no special weapons or anything like that. You get four weapons at the start. You get a side shot, a back shot, a vertical shot, a diagonal shot. And you can just rotate between each one. Each one has a different color and they can be powered up. But you have to think ahead and think quick to determine like which way, because not only you have to maneuver between bullets and everything, but which weapon will do the best against these particular enemies. It's so cool because it's like, all right, you know what you did? You actually turned this shmup into a puzzle game, into a puzzler.
Ah,
It's like
yeah.
this is kind of wicked because another streamer that I watch who does something similar and also part of the inspiration for me to do growing up Genesis because he did his own. He called it the Mega Drive Odyssey. He doesn't do it in like alphabetical order or anything. He just plays whatever games he feels like. But he
Mhm.
wants to eventually play all the. He's in Japan. And like he eventually wants to play all the Mega Drive games. And so when I started watching his stream about it and he started talking about Hellfire, I was like, you know what? We're getting really close to that in the A to Z. It's like, let me see how I feel about it. And I wound up loving it. And I was like, oh, dang. So this went from like a 3G game to a 5G game after sitting down and playing it. Like, this is awesome. Granted, I don't think it's as good as Fire Shark, but it's really, really awesome. But those two, and what's another one that I can think of that really surprised me about how good it was? I know we already talked about Arnold Palmer's Tournament Golf, but
That still surprises me that that's good. I mean,
it's
just because
very
golf games just
good.
doesn't scream like, "This is an interesting game," but you know what? Like I said, I haven't really given any sports games a try. I also have never heard of Hellfire either, so 'cause shmups have never been my cup of tea. So I'm always curious about, like, really earnestly trying one. A friend of the show, Chris from Retro Hangover, suggests, like, if you wanna get into shmups, try Blazing Lasers.
Oh, that's a
Uh,
great one to start with.
that's what a lot of people say, so I don't know, maybe I'll give one of them a shot.
I mean, when it comes to retro consoles and shmups, really the two best ones, in my opinion, are the Genesis and the TurboGrafx 16 slash PC Engine. Like
Ye
they're really the two best. In fact,
Mhm.
Hellfire is also on the PC Engine.
There we go.
It's slightly different, though.
N
It is slightly different, but it's roughly about the same. But and one that I could tell you, oh man, oh one I could tell you that I have now, and I hate to do this. This is also because I've been on kind of a kick for this franchise lately. I just beat Double Dragon 2 on the NES on stream the other night, finally,
Mhm.
after like 30 years.
Game's
Double Dragon
brutal.
3 on Genesis. Oh Lord.
Not good.
Oh, it's awful. It's
Oh,
straight and the sad thing is that on Genesis, there's not a single good Double Dragon. Like I like Double Dragon, but all four of the Double Dragon games that are on Genesis, none of them are good. They all have some major problem, but 3 is the worst one by far because it's like Double Dragon 5, the fighting game is just boring. Double Dragon 1 has an AI problem where it's
okay.
literally a slog to try to beat your enemies because they copy your every move. And it's also really sluggish. Double Dragon 2, which only came out in Japan, has slowdown problems and it's really ugly. But 3 is completely broken.
That's
And like,
so odd.
oh, because I was like, I remember it not being good, but I don't remember it being this bad.
Well, wasn't Double Dragon on the Master System a really good port?
Yes. Now that's the Master System. Double Dragon on the Master System is decent. I think at the end of the day, I still prefer the NES game, but the Master System port is good. But all the ones on Genesis, no, none of them are good. But 3 especially, like it's one of those I remember this being not so great, but I don't remember it being awful. But yeah, it's awful.
That's crazy. It boggles my mind that like you can do it so right on the previous less powerful system, but then screw it up on its successor. That's just odd to me. But
Yep.
it is what it is. Now, I
Yep, good segue from that too. Batman Revenge of the Joker. That was the other one
oh,
I was gonna talk about because
okay,
that's the exact problem with Batman Revenge of the Joker. Because Sunsoft somehow bungled this port so bad. Because the
huh?
NES game is great. Like, in my opinion, I think it's great, but the Genesis one, it's slow, it's ugly, and it's just unfair, like, completely unfair. Yeah.
Now, I have talking about the Genesis in general. I guessed it on a show. I mean, at the time this comes out, it'll be like a month or so ago. And I brought this up, and I want to get your opinion on this. Now, I understand both you and I will have an inherent bias for what I'm about to ask. The name of the system. Do you prefer Mega Drive or Genesis? Which to you is a better name? I know we're both North American kids, so we grew up with Genesis.
Yeah.
Um, so I understand there is a little bit of that bias, but I got it. Like, do you still prefer that name or do you prefer Mega Drive?
At the end of the day, I prefer Mega Drive. Mainly
Really?
because it's like, so I am betraying my own series because like it's called Growing Up Genesis, right? But I prefer Mega Drive just for one simple reason, because at least at that point when I say Mega Drive, everybody would know what I'm talking about. Because like
Yeah.
I hate the fact that a lot of times, like when I'm writing scripts for YouTube, I mean, that sounds harsh. I
Well,
don't
you
mean it
have to
like that,
say
but I mean
Genesis
like I
slash
have to say
Mega Drive
Genesis
every
slash
time.
Mega Drive. I know somebody who says Mega Gen. Like he goes
Mega.
out of his way, he says Mega
Well,
Gen, but I'm like, the people really don't know what you're talking about.
so then I got it. But here's the thing, though. Would you say, do you prefer that, or is it based off of like that's a practical reason to prefer Mega Drive? But on pure aesthetics, do you prefer that? Do you prefer it still, or do you still prefer Mega Drive over Genesis on just pure aesthetics for yourself?
Nah, no, I think really from myself and pure aesthetics, I prefer Genesis. I think from a practical standpoint, I prefer Mega Drive. But on a personal standpoint, I prefer Genesis just because, it is the beginning. And for me, especially, like it really was the beginning because like Atari and NES first like kind of lit the flame, but then the Genesis came around and threw gasoline on the flame. That's
Yeah.
really what it was. So I think from a personal standpoint, yeah, I prefer
I
Genesis.
no, I hope listeners. I hope I didn't lead the question too much to get G to answer because I'm also with you. I prefer Genesis to Mega Drive just on pure naming. I think the Sega Genesis sounds cooler than the Sega Mega Drive. And I think the reason I feel that way, part of it is definitely nostalgia. I'm not going to pretend that that's not part of it, but the other part is like every time I hear the word Mega Drive, I just feel like it's someone trying to recreate the '90s in a cringy way. Even though this came out in but you know how like everything on every kid's cartoon is like Mega this or Mega that or
Right.
something like that.
Mega wow.
Yeah, Mega wow. And so when I hear Mega Drive, I'm just like, this is just a shitty naming convention. And I get it. That's what they called it everywhere else in Japan, in Europe, literally in Australia, everywhere but North America. They called it the Mega Drive. But for me, Genesis just sounds so much more evocative than Mega Drive, which feels very bland. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, though.
I don't know if I would say bland, as if it feels classy. Like to me, like it like just the name Mega Drive and then the look of the logo and the look of the console, like it just seems classy, but it doesn't like elicit. I can't think of another word to say it, but I'm gonna say edgy. Like it gives that little bit of edge, that little bit of attitude. I know these are
Hmm.
canned words, but that Genesis does. Literally, Genesis does.
What Nintendo didn't.
Yep.
Sorry, I had to squeeze that in there.
Yep.
Even so, like looking at just some of the boxes and stuff, like I do like Mega Drive artwork more than the Genesis. Like the Genesis has like really plain looking text on the box. I don't know. I'm just analyzing stuff that doesn't need to be analyzed.
Hey, you know what? But that's
That
what you're thinking,
you
though.
know what? That would be a fun video. Shout out, copyright you and me.
Right,
Would
right. Patent pending. Just gotta think
patent
about
pending.
that.
There we go. Now moving kind of a little bit away from Genesis, growing up Genesis specifically, I want to talk more about content creation as a whole. Something that is like not a lot of people, not well, depending on which, if you're a fan of Nintendo over Sega. Like, it's wild to me that the console wars are still just as strong now as they were back then
Oh yeah.
in some weird ways. But the reality of it is, I mean, the most content creators, most retro gaming content creators, and even like some modern content creators on YouTube are Nintendo focused. There's a lot of Nintendo bias. Like, Nintendo games in general get more favorable reviews, and this isn't like me being like angry about it. It's just kind of like stating it matter of factly, you know.
Mhm.
In general, Nintendo gets looked on a little bit more fondly. So you, as someone who is more Sega focused, what, like, this question I feel like it's asked a lot, but I wanted to get your take on it. Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think so much of the YouTube retro gaming scene is Nintendo focused, or at least Nintendo favorable, if that makes sense?
I think, well, there's multiple reasons that you could really go into that. I think one of the easiest reasons is because it's kind of simple. I mean, Nintendo as a console and as a runner in the console race is still around.
Yep.
So that's one of the biggest reasons, is that because they're still around, they're still prominent. I mean, the Switch is hot. Like, they're still
Yeah.
like very, very prominent. So when you look at that versus Sega, of course more creators are going to lean
I mean,
towards that because it's
been
still in the minds of everybody.
it's been 20 years since the last Sega system released. Over
Yep.
20 years. So
And I
yeah,
still, I still get the question that people ask me. It's just like, should Sega come out with a new console? My answer is no. Like,
not in this
absolutely not.
current climate now.
No. But they are doing right by bringing back some of their old IPs. But anyway, that's one reason. I think the other reason is comes back to, for the content creators that are making retro focused content around our age group, right? I'm assuming you and I are probably around the same age,
Yeah,
right?
I'm like mid
So
30s now.
okay, okay, so we're close. So, but what's instilled in the mind of most of us was those console wars of the mid '90s, and Nintendo was a lot of a stronger force. There were more people that were backing on the minds of Nintendo. It's just more popular. So, by sheer numbers alone, like on that too, more people are going to have more nostalgia for Nintendo than they do for Sega. And again, in the quest for trying to get out there and grow your channels and all that kind of stuff, you're by nature you're going to lean towards what more people are getting eyes on. And so if more people are getting eyes on Nintendo, but then that stands to be someone like me, or for someone like us, because there's a couple of Sega creators or Sega real focus creators I can definitely mention too that make outstanding content. So we might not be able to get it on like the pure sheer numbers level like somebody who does something with Nintendo. So what do? We have to find the oddities. We have to do the things outside the box that many people don't even see that might, spur a little bit more attention. Again, one of the
Mhm.
other reasons why I decided to do Growing Up Genesis. Because those little things. Or you focus on the things, which is my number three reason why I feel that like Sega doesn't quite get in as much as Nintendo, is because there's still this misconception that Sega is only really known for Sonic, Yakuza,
Yeah.
and to an extent the Atlas games series, Persona, Shin Megami Tensei, and to a very, very, very small, minute extent, Hatsune Miku. I've got a whole. I have not published this yet, but I wrote an entire like video essay about how Hatsune Miku saved Sega. One of these days, I will make that video because I have a lot of points about that.
Huh.
Dark times for Sega in the seventh gen, man, really were. But in any case, though, so you got to break that misconception that's weirdly, and unfortunately, it's kind of double edged, right? Because as much as I want to say, it's not really fair for you to say, okay, Sega's really only known for these things, but it's also understandable because for the longest time, until recently, the longest time, that's really all Sega was doing for us. And what was coming out in for say, Xbox One, PS4, what was really coming out around those times, pretty much Sonic and Yakuza, and the
Yeah.
occasional football manager, whatever Atlas is doing. That's all we're getting for so long. But now we're finally starting to see a focus on some of the other IPs that are getting love, like Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi, Sama de
Yep.
Amigo just got a new game, right? It's like many of these other smaller franchises that are starting to pop up, and it's good because like people will say, "Oh, we're more than just Sonic," like which is great, right? But on the YouTube side, going back to the okay, people really like to watch what they're comfortable with. Sometimes you gotta hit on the head that it's like, okay, well, the Genesis is awesome and it does more than just Sonic and sports games. Let me show you some cool games that maybe you might have missed. I'm
Mhm.
all about that. Finding the obscure oddities that maybe you might not know about. And it might not necessarily dictate views all the time, but as long as you chip away at it and you start seeing that, oh, you know what? I'm gonna tune in and see what kind of weird stuff that this G person is putting out there. It's like, I wonder what kind of Sega stuff I'm gonna learn about. Because I always say that. Let's learn together
Mhm.
because not only am I rekindling a lot of the stuff with the Growing Up Genesis series that I grew up with, but I'm also learning new things. I haven't played there's 700 plus games on the Genesis slash Mega
A
Drive.
lot of
I
games.
haven't played every single one, so there are some that I'm going through that I've never played before. Another game, oh, going back, another one that shocked the heck out of me and how much I loved is a Koei airplane simulator game,
What?
Aerobiz. Yeah,
Okay.
that surprised me. At its core, it's like Risk. It's like a board game. You have to manage your airline. You have to manage the workers. You have to manage the union workers. You have to manage the fuel. You have to manage everything. Make relations with other countries. And on paper, it sounds boring as hell. But when you actually play it, though, I had a blast. Like when I started capturing for it, I was like, oh, I only need like 30 minutes of capture for the video. It'll be fine. 3 hours later, I'm like, my wife comes in the room. She's like, "Are you still playing that? Like, this is awesome." I was like, "I kind of love this."
That's
Um,
wild.
yeah.
There is some wild stuff on the system. There's one, and you haven't got into it yet. It's in the T section, so you got a little ways to go.
Mhm.
And I don't. I tried dabbling in it, but when I first tried it, but it's called Tyrants Fight Through Time, and it's a port of a PC game called Megalomania. It's an
Yes.
RTS game. And it just like the whole idea is like you play through different epochs of human history, so like you go through, like a certain century or a certain era of time, and you're literally having to defeat these other deities through different ages of human history. It's wild.
Yep. That's
And
one
that's why
I've
it's
I've
called.
never played it.
I own a copy of it. It's at my parents' house right now because I've been people listeners will have heard this for a little bit. I've been in the process of tearing down my game room because my wife and I are trying to find a house. So to make it easier, I don't want to have to pack everything up in like a weekend. um,
Right.
so I've been working on that. But in any case, so yeah, I had to shout that out just because thinking about like strategy games, something that you wouldn't really associate necessarily with Sega, because Sega is known for that blast processing, high speed action, and all that other
Yep.
stuff. And to bring it back to what I was saying before, like retro gaming content and Nintendo Focus and all that other stuff. um, I I think for me, what bums me out. Now, I mean, listen, I love Nintendo. It's one of my favorite. And being completely honest, I do prefer the Super Nintendo to the Genesis. But with that said, I feel like the
How dare
Genesis,
you?
as Rodney Dangerfield would say, doesn't get no respect in the at large, and it's because I mean it gets respect by a lot of people who maybe would have grown up with it because Sega didn't last through the console wars. They don't make consoles anymore. I feel like in general it doesn't get talked about enough, and that's why I was excited to talk to you about Growing Up Genesis, because I mentioned it on the episode. I actually didn't even shout it out. Shout out to SuperPod Saga. We were talking about fourth generation consoles. Me,
Mhm.
Chris Copeland, and Aaron, the host of SuperPod Saga, and I said it on the episode when we were talking about the Genesis. I feel like it's a system that buried in its library, there is a number of hidden gems that we still have yet to unearth because
Oh
no one
yeah.
talks about it on like when you look at even like from a game history perspective, right? Game histories, it's a lot of it is focused on what people grew up with and enjoyed more, and because they're going to start with that, and then maybe if they still have an interest they'll branch out. And like you said, the Super Nintendo ultimately ended up being more popular, barely, like in the long run. And Nintendo obviously is still going, so of course Nintendo as a company is still more popular in that regard. So people are going to focus a lot more on Nintendo history and Nintendo games. But when that happens, you kind of leave behind some really interesting things like the Pico, like the Master System. I did a whole episode on the Sega SG-1000 because no one talks about like very few people in North America know anything about anything prior to the Master System.
Mhm.
And it's history that just doesn't get talked about. So it I like I said, I love Nintendo, all that stuff. So I'm not trying to make it sound like it's bad that there's so many Nintendo focused content creators. It's not. I would just love to see more Sega ones
Oh
because
yeah,
there's so much to talk about with Sega. I mean, hell, you could do an entire episode alone, and entire podcasts have been done on just the history of Sega from the 32X up until the Dreamcast, like that whole like 5 6 year span of just chaos between Sega of America and Sega of Japan and all this stuff. So it to bring it back, I because I'm rambling a little bit, it just bums me out that like Nintendo is so focused. It is so Nintendo focused, and when that happens, there's so much of the perception of gaming history seems to be colored by that when it's not necessarily true. And this isn't Nintendo specific, but the idea, like the game crash in 1983, a lot of
yeah,
people online still talk about that as if it was a worldwide thing when it's actually just a very specifically a North American thing.
absolutely.
um and was it there? Who's that one YouTuber? Stika,
Oh,
ST1K,
Stika. Yeah.
Stika. Um, his stuff, like he covers so many things that no one talks about, and I wish that more people like him and like yourself would get the recognition they deserve. Now, Stika, I mean, he's got like his channel's been growing a lot, which is awesome, but
Oh yeah.
still, like there's so much stuff that just does not get talked about now. I want to tie into that to kind of talk about like what is something like stuff that doesn't get talked about, like Nintendo things, or not, excuse me, Sega things that don't get talked about. What's something that about Sega, like start specifically with the Genesis and the Genesis era, and then if you have something more broadly over the history of the company that you wish more people knew, like what's something that like is like really interesting to you that you'd feel not enough people talk about.
Well, things I'd probably say that people don't really talk about. I think music specifically on the Genesis is something that I feel needs a lot more love.
Mm,
Like between that, I feel that there's again going back to those misconceptions, console wars and whatnot. Because, and I'm not going to sit here and just completely like push up roses saying that every game on the Genesis sounds fantastic. No, we just talked about Double Dragon 3. Some games sound absolutely horrible, but
yeah.
there are some that just sound absolutely amazing beyond the big games that like Sonic and Streets of Rage and Shinobi. Like we know those games have incredible soundtracks, but there are some out there that many people miss out, like Musha. Like Musha has an incredible soundtrack.
Mhm.
Socket, Gauntlet 4. And there's some that are even like the Ooze. The Ooze is another one that people miss out on that just sounds amazing. Light Crusader, pretty much anything that Treasure Co makes. Like there's so many that people miss out on because the thing is, oh, Genesis sounds like farts. I'm like, okay, it's only because many times it's the Western developed games that don't quite get it right, and it's
They
not
were
always
given
based
what was that
on
sound engine that they were given by Sega?
gems.
Gems, and with very little instruction.
Exactly, because you can put some bangers out using gems. It's happened. It absolutely has multiple times over. But it's just again going back to kind of those misconceptions. But it's one of those that's just like I feel that a lot of people need to just kind of look at the general broad library of the Genesis instead of it being just, oh, you know, sports games, Sonic. Just looking at something beyond that because there's so many different gems that are definitely worth mining that many people miss out, particularly around electronic arts. I think that's another thing that people miss out on the Genesis. Electronic arts' involvement, especially in the early days of the Genesis, is really fascinating. When you
Hmm.
see the different ports, the PC ports, the Amiga ports that they made, of course, it was the beginning. A lot of people don't even want to give us the credit for that. It's just like, hey, if it weren't for the Genesis, you might not even have John Madden football. Just saying.
Yeah,
Might
that's
not.
very
It's like
true.
Madden got started there. NHL got started. Well, actually, I think they technically had started on PC first. I could be wrong about that. But still, as far as console wise, that's really where they got started. And yeah, it's just those little tiny things. I
I
just wish that
mean,
people would open up about the library of the Genesis a little bit more than just being focused on a few core franchises
mhm.
or a few core genres. And then, like I said, giving the music a little bit of a pass to more than anything.
And I was going to say, you're right. I believe Madden started on the PC or computers first, but it was the Genesis that popularized it. Like they may not have started on the Genesis, but if it wasn't for the Genesis and its popularity, who knows where the series would have gone? Like eventually there would have been some football game, but it wouldn't have been Madden.
Right.
There'd
And
be
I mean,
something else.
I mean, Sega stepped in with their NFL series, or
Mhm.
Joe Montana. You know, it's like they stepped in with that, but it didn't quite have the same sort of oomph that Madden had. And I think another thing too. Now, granted, growing up, Genesis is focused on the American Genesis library, the US Genesis library, but there's going to be a few imports that we're going to touch on. And I think it's really fascinating to see some of the games because I don't know if this happens nearly as much on Super Nintendo, but I know on Genesis, there's quite a few games that have the same name across different regions, but are totally different games that, or at least are handled differently. Perfect example, Marble Madness. Like Marble Madness over here in the West, Electronic Arts handled it and it's not a good port. But in Japan, Tengen did their own port of Marble Madness
Okay.
with the same name, and it is almost arcade perfect. You could even use the Master System trackball if you want. Like it's
Whoa, okay.
really, really cool. Another one, Clax. Clax is another example that Clax was released in America by Tengen, but in this case in Japan, Namco put it out. And not only that, it has multiplayer. Whereas the American one doesn't have that. Like, what? It's just little things that blow your mind that that I didn't really catch anything like that on Super Nintendo. So it's always cool to find those little things, right? But yeah, I think it just really comes down to just going into a deeper look at the library instead of looking at it at the surface level of just being known for X thing, right? There's a lot of tremendous games that people missed out on, and then there's Green Dog, but there's still a lot of tremendous games to look out
An
for.
Awesome Possum.
Yeah,
That game is brutal. That game,
yeah,
um,
not the
for
worst,
no.
but it's pretty high up there.
My for myself, just to for me to answer, like, what's something I wish more people knew about Sega? It's the Sega Channel. I wish
Yeah,
more people knew about the Sega Channel because I feel like there is a large portion that, even if you know about it, I feel like it's not appreciated enough. One of the other questions I had written down here, and you already kind of touched on it, so if there is anything more you can elaborate it on it, I was going to say, what's an underappreciated aspect of Sega, both retro and in the modern context? Like if there's anything of modern Sega that's underappreciated. So I'll throw that over to you if you have anything in a minute. But for me, with the Sega Channel, like, it doesn't get enough love. Like, it was one of the first online, it wasn't the first, but it was one of the first online services for a home console. And I mean, I can't say for certain, at least, but in North America, it might have been the first that was done first party, because there was other stuff like the Atari 2600 had an online service through, I forget what the company was. But it wasn't Atari. It was someone else and all that other stuff. But this was done through Sega. You would
right.
plug in your phone line into the modem that would go in the cartridge slot, and that's where people could play Mega Man the Wily Wars. You could also get Pulse Man, I believe, right?
Yep, Pulse
That
Man.
Yep. Which
Yeah, there's
Game
so
Freak.
many. There was also import games that you couldn't play over here that were on the Sega Channel, like Nightmare Circus and Hurricanes. Like there
Mhm.
were several others that didn't come to North America that you could play. You could try out all these games. I mean, I had Sega Channel
Oh,
when I
did
was
you?
younger. Oh yeah, yeah. There's a if you look on my YouTube channel, like one of my first gaming items I'm proud to own videos. My wife actually bought me a Sega Channel adapter to replicate the one that I had growing up. And you'll see the pictures that I took as a kid before we had to send it back because we were moving. And where we were moving, they didn't have Sega channels, so we had to give
Oh,
everything
no.
back to our cable companies. There's a picture of me with the actual adapter, and she gave me that replica adapter. It doesn't
Oh,
work,
that's
of course,
awesome.
obviously, but it still turns on. It still plays the music, but it doesn't do anything else.
That's awesome, though.
But yeah, I mean, Sega Channel. So going off of what you said, and I think that's a perfect way to kind of go into what I was going to say about is this. I feel there's one thing that people don't really know or really kind of look at Sega in this aspect is that Sega was very, very often the innovator that
Mhm.
always kind of got their thunder stolen. I don't
Yes.
mean this to like to throw shade at the competition because that's what competition does. It's like you either fold or you get better. Like you have to find some sort of way
Yep.
to improve. Otherwise, if you're doing the same thing as the other guy, then why buy your product? And that's kind of where Nintendo and Sony came in, and even Microsoft would come in later on. You know, they would all come in and just kind of every single one. Sega was kind of with the exception of the 8-bit days because NES, but pretty much like everything after that, Sega was always like the first one to come through. And then if it weren't for what they did, we wouldn't really have the Super Nintendo. If it weren't really for what, the Saturn, we might not have the PlayStation. And if it weren't for the Dreamcast, we might not have the GameCube and the Xbox because they were really the first one to kind of come through. And people say, "Oh, well, Sega was a failure." It's like, but were they though?
They were
Because the thing is
almost
that
too early to everything.
they were the pioneer, and every facet of technology needs a pioneer. Are they always super successful? No, but if you don't have a pioneer, you're just spinning your wheels.
I guess I never even thought about, like, I was like, what, the Saturn came out the Saturn came out after the PlayStation. No, it came out before in North
It came out
America, right?
before in North America,
Yeah,
yes,
because they were
because Sega
trying.
jumped the gun.
Yeah, Sega jumped the gun. And that was an infamous bungle, excuse me. But
299.
they were
Mhm.
trying to push it already because I mean, most likely Nintendo started getting into the disc-based things because they saw what they were doing with Sega CD. I can't say for certain because Sega CD came out what, 92, 91,
I believe 92. I'd
92,
have to double check that, but I know it wasn't 91, but I believe it was 92. That
and
or
then
90
obviously
93.
the whole infamous stuff with Nintendo backing out of the Sony deal, but we won't rehash all that. But
Oh, yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah.
you're absolutely right. Like I feel like that is 100% one of the most underappreciated things is that they were the innovators. Like the Sega Dreamcast, right? Everyone always talks about, but the fact that you could play like on, like that was one of the first built-in online systems. I think it
Correct.
was the first. Um, I shouldn't say the first definitively. I haven't done enough research to see if there was another
I think it was the
console.
first commercially available one to have everything
Okay,
all built in, as far as I know, because I know with because PlayStation never really had one. Saturn had NetLink, but you had to buy it separately. Nintendo never had one, so I believe Dreamcast was the first one to have built-in online. I think so.
that's just wild to think, and it's just crazy. Like and the fact that like what you like that they pioneered like going into CD technology a little bit earlier than a lot of other people did. Like there were some, unless the TurboGrafx CD came out before then, but I don't know
Oh,
when that
TurboGrafx
came.
CD came out before.
Okay, so there we go. Never mind. I take back what I said with that. But um, the fact that they were even just trying like goofy things, like the Sega Tower, as some people affectionately
The
call it, where you
Tower of
could put
Power.
the Tower of Power. There you go. The 32X with the like what is it, the Game Shark with the Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and then it's like four things tall or
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
It
And
just
if they want to be extra cool, they have a Model 1 Sega CD underneath it, just make it even taller.
so
Yep.
it's even more gigantic. I love it. I love all that. Sorry, I cut you off there. Was there anything that you wanted to go into with that more? And was there anything modern Sega that you feel is underappreciated?
As far as modern Sega goes, I don't really think that there's anything I would say that's really underappreciated because again, going back to we're only seeing what they're providing us, and I feel that we've now kind of hit into a spot where Sega for what they're doing now is very much appreciated. It's like Sega and Yakuza is pretty much always open with huge open arms and love. I mean Sonic, sorry, like Sonic and Yakuza is pretty much always. I mean to an extent, right? But like Yakuza is pretty much always out there with open
Hmm.
arms. Anytime they put out something new, it's like, well, bang, home run. Because RGG Studio, they don't miss. Like they really don't. But just the sheer fact that I think they're finally starting to get it again, going back to the power to next level. The four franchises that I mean, I know they're still in development, but just the sheer fact that they're going back to their roots a little bit, and then stuff like Streets of Rage 4, Wonder Boy and Monsterland, Asha and Monster World, excuse me, Wonder Boy, Asha, and Monsterland, and the Alex Kidd remake, the Panzer Dragoon remake. So there's still, I think there's still a good force in it that I don't really, I can't really say that they're what they're doing now is underappreciated. Like, could they be doing more? Oh yeah, absolutely. But they're working on it. I say I have faith that they're working on it.
I hope I'm really hoping that Sega, not saying, I mean, the nerd in me would love for them to create another home console. I don't think it would be financially smart at all, but the nerd in me would love to see it. But I love that they are kind of returning to the roots, but not in a like how can I describe, like a boomer mentality? Like it was better in the old days. Not like that, it seems like. It feels very much like let's take some IPs that we know are going to be popular and let's modernize them a little bit.
Yep.
Let's bring them back and make new versions of it. And I really hope it could go horribly wrong as with any game that comes out, but from Sega's perspective, it's a smart move. Like you could totally make another uh oh my gosh, Jet Set Radio, especially with
Mhm.
Hi-Fi Rush that just came out last
Yeah,
year.
oh,
And
Hi-Fi
everyone
Rush was
talks about,
awesome.
like, that was essentially the honestly, I'm not surprised that Sega announced it after they saw the success of Hi-Fi Rush, and they're like, "Oh, so this could be popular again? Okay."
That and, Bomb Rush Cyberpunk too, because
Mhm,
that's the other one, is, both of those games kinda came out around the same time, so I wonder if maybe that put that little bug in the ear for Sega, to do that, right? So maybe they
mhm.
did, it's possible.
And
But yeah,
then
you're
obviously
absolutely right, though, I agree. I
and
agree,
what
it's
is
just they're
it,
looking at it with that new coat.
Streets of Rage 4, like you mentioned before, that was crazy
Oh,
popular,
4 was amazing.
and everyone says how good it is. I have yet to play it, but
Oh, you gotta. It's so good.
I do enjoy beat 'em ups. I'm not good at them, but modern beat 'em ups are a lot more forgiving, so I think I can, I think I can handle them well enough. But yeah, there was a panel I went to years ago that was talking about like appreciating Sega, but from a modern perspective. Like it was all, and this was a couple years ago now, but it was talking about Sega like post like 2003, and it was just talking about different games that are like really because isn't Super Monkey Ball Sega?
Oh, yeah. Super
Super
Monkey
Monkey
Oh, yeah,
Ball.
see, and here I am forgetting Super Monkey Ball, which also is getting a new game. It's like, so yeah,
Mhm.
Super Monkey Ball has still been going strong, like, for all of these years.
And Sega even was a publisher for some like unique things. What is it? Mad World, I think, was a Sega published
Yes.
game. Um, they do not own them anymore, but for a little bit they owned Relic Entertainment, which did Company of Heroes. And
Yep,
I'm a huge Company of Heroes fan. In fact, I think they just sold them off like within like the last week or so.
they
like
did. They
like
did.
this is a very recent development, which is a bummer to me, but I get it. I don't know how well the game did. I didn't buy Company of Heroes 3, not because I didn't want. I don't have the money to drop on it right now.
I don't think it did bad. I think right now, I mean, this is just my theory. I think Sega is just really, really centralizing on their own stuff right now, because the company that made Total War, Creative Assembly, right? So I
Hmm.
know they're restructuring things over there too. And I think a lot of it came from that mistake that was hyenas. That I'm not going to get into that, but I think this is kind of my theory. I mean, between that and the power to the next level, again, going back to those new IPs that are coming back and how much they're focusing on the others, I think Sega is really honing in on their own core IPs. And personally, I think that's an excellent move. It sucks because yeah, these other game franchises will have to find new homes, new publishers. I believe they will. It's like I think they will. But at the same time, though, I think that's great news because if there's one thing that they've been needing for literally the past 10 plus years, is to take a look at some of these other franchises and give them new life. And that's what it seems like they're doing. All the meanwhile, you know, what's powering them in the background? Sonic Yakuza Persona. There you go.
Hmm. Dude, I Yakuza must be doing like just helping Sega immensely. With
Gangbusters.
yeah,
They're doing tremendously well.
I actually recently picked up a bunch of the Yakuza games. It's been probably like 3 or 4 months since I last touched it, but I've been trying to work my way through Yakuza Zero for quite some
Nice.
time. Just
Nice.
have how I've logged like 15 hours into it as well, but that's like nothing. That's like a 70-hour game or whatever. I don't know. They're long. They're long as hell. Um,
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I get asked a lot if I would ever stream Yakuza. And I was like, I would love to, but man, those games are long. They are
yeah.
very long. And so if I only stream it like 1 day a week, as opposed to like growing up Genesis, which takes like 2 out of my 4 days, one of my other days is Nintendo. So I have like, hey, I've got one extra day. I'll be on Yakuza Zero the whole year. We might get through one game a year, maybe, if we're lucky.
Man, there's so I started playing them on stream as well, but like I focus on one game at a time on stream, so like I can move through it a little bit quicker. But even then, what is it? I'm playing through Dragon Quest 2 right now on stream,
Mhm.
and even that, like I'm like probably 12 hours in, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so long. It's just crazy. So I'm not sure how I'm going to feel if I ever continue that Yakuza playthrough on Twitch, but before we wrap up, I have one other question for you about growing up Genesis, and then we can go into our plugs and whatnot.
Sure.
I've already asked you about games that disappointed you and games that surprised you, but looking to the future of growing up Genesis, what are some titles coming up that both my listeners could look forward to if they want to check you out on Twitch? Because, like you said, you're going to be probably closer to H or J by the time this episode comes out. So from there on and out, like, what are some games that you personally are looking forward to covering on Growing Up Genesis, besides the Sonic ones, of course?
Of course, of course. So, yeah, because we should be in the letter J by the time your video comes out. I can tell you, there's one game in the letter J that I am hugely excited for. It's a game no one talks about. It's called Jewel Master. Like, no
Hmm.
one talks about this one. It's a side-scrolling, like, Golden Axe style hack and slash. But the funny thing is that you control a magician who wears different colored rings on his hands, and depending on the color of ring combination that you choose, changes the type of weapon that you use to take out your enemies.
Huh.
Imagine, are you familiar with Rastan or the Rastan Saga?
I have heard of it. I don't know much about it.
Okay. Well, okay. Imagine something like Golden Axe, but it's like a side scroller instead of being like an isometric beat 'em up. That kind of environment. But yeah, you mix and match the different type of rings, the jewel rings that you put on your hands, and it changes the type of weapon. And it's a fantastic game. It's one that like Sega published it themselves. And it's one that nobody talks about. I'm just like, I'm so excited to dig into that one. Because sometimes, most of the time, we're growing up Genesis, I'll do mostly 2 to 3 games a stream on
Hmm.
average. But then there are some games that I will dedicate a full stream to because, if not more, it's the case with the next one I'm looking forward to, Kid Chameleon, because that's the other one because that's coming up in K, and I know Kid Chameleon is real polarizing. I know some people love it and some people hate it, and this will be the first time that we're actually going to beat it. Hopefully, now my thing is that sometimes like I'll play. I didn't even mention that whenever I do growing up Genesis, I either play on original hardware or I'm doing on my analog Mega SG. Right, it's normally one of the two using actual hardware. But in the case of Kid Chameleon, we're actually going to use. Sometimes I'll use Switch Online, or I'll use my Genesis Mini. Sometimes, depending on the
Hmm.
games, that way, you know. Some games that are super long, like Kid Chameleon, use save states. We stand save states in this house sometimes, and I'm just
I
like,
feel
this,
you on that.
yeah, because that game is way too long to try to beat in one sitting, and is we'll be utilizing that for sure. But still, I'm looking forward to finally finishing and seeing the proper end of that game. And then I guess probably the next one after that is another gem that I've talked about this on my channels multiple times. But one of my favorite games that I feel that nobody gives a whole lot of love to is Light Crusader, and
Mm.
that'll be in the letter L. It's an isometric dungeon crawler game from Treasure, Treasure Code, the Gunstar Heroes people.
Mhm.
But it has a distinctly like Western vibe. Like think something like a Skyrim, right?
Okay.
It has like a distinct Western vibe, but it has that quirky Japanese humor. It's this weird like mesh of styles, and it's so fun to go through all the different missions, to go through the riddles that you have to answer. It's beautiful, but it's a game that just never gets a whole lot of love, and it's another one I'm just super super looking forward to. But as every letter goes through, I mean, there's always going to be like at least one or two, with the exception of I. There's going to be like one or two that I know. There's going to be one that, well, actually, no. I mean, even that's not completely unfair because I mean, I has in Sector X. I mean, that game's all right, right? Like it's okay. But the April Fool's Eye stream is going to be fun too. Like we'll dig through them all together. But then we've got one here, and I'm like, Instruments of Chaos starring young Indiana Jones.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not looking. I I did not know that was an infamously bad game.
It's oof. Yeah, it's this is one that Sega published again themselves, and I'm just like, where how? Like, how did you let this get this bad? But however though, but like I said, I like to sing the praises of games more than detriment them. So my
I'm with
my
you.
best is just, yeah, those are the ones that I'm really really looking forward to in the A to Z or Z, depending on where you're at. So yeah.
No, it's Z. We're American. No, I'm just kidding. uh, no, I'm with you too on the you don't like to denigrate or you don't like to belittle games, I should say. I'm firmly of the opinion that even if a game is bad, actually every game is good in some way, shape, or form. Because if it's bad, you can at least give reasons like as to why it's bad, as to just saying, "Oh man, it sucks." Like it's a
Yep.
learning tool almost for you to like what makes a game good for you personally, what makes a game bad for you personally. And it's I'm a firm believer that if a game is popular, like if a game series or a game is popular and you just don't enjoy it, that's fine. But like so for example, I just did a month ago, I did the Mario month with all the Mario Kart games.
Mhm.
I don't like Mario Kart games. I'm not a Mario Kart fan,
Okay.
but I wanted to cover them to like try to look at them from a different perspective because I choose not to try them because it doesn't appeal to me. Like I can't give you a reason as to why I don't like them other than I just don't find them fun. Like or I shouldn't say fun but engaging. And that's just personal. Like there's no game design reason as to why. And that was what was kind of fun about doing the series. It's because I learned like okay, this is why people like it. This is what people enjoy about it. So that's what I that's why I kind of agree with what you're saying. Like, no game's really bad.
Yeah.
You find different reasons to enjoy it, and I enjoyed doing that Mario Kart series. I enjoyed playing the games and like talking with people about it and hearing their passion and their nostalgia for it. It was a lot of fun, and it was a super like rewarding series to do. And that's why I'm looking forward to a bunch of the games that you talked about that some of which I've never even heard. Personally, I'm excited for when you get to High Seas Havoc.
Oh,
Um,
I just did High Seas Havoc.
oh,
That's one
did
I
you?
I
Oh, yeah,
didn't I
you were
didn't
an
talk about
H.
High Seas Havoc. High Seas Havoc, man, I love the game. It's awesome. Those last 2 boss fights though, man. Oh, goodness. Just
I
don't
forgot.
let
Yeah,
that
you're about
don't let that turn you away from the game. But those last 2 boss fights are rough. But other than that, it's a wonderful game. Another one that people miss out on.
that, and so I totally forgot. You like you said, you're at I. H comes before I. I swear I know my alphabet. I swear. But
It's all
this
good.
one I know you haven't gotten to yet because it's R. Rocket Knight Adventures.
Oh, of
Oh my
course.
god, that game
All-time
is.
fave.
It's so good. It's so good.
All-time fave. Now, granted, the sequel, however, is one of those cases that I actually like the Super Nintendo game more than the Genesis one. But
Oh,
when it comes to the original, though, I mean, Rocket Knight Adventures is just it's incredible, and I cannot wait for the Respark collection to come out. I pre-ordered the big collector's edition from Limited Run. I got the plush. Like I'm ready. Like I'm ready. Bring this out. I know Felix the Cat I think comes out next week, but I know Rocket Knight should be like right after that. Like I'm so ready. But I love Rocket Knight Adventures.
it's a
Like
good game. It's a really
incredible
good game.
game.
And it's also one of those ones where I feel like if you're into Sega, you know Rocket Knight. But if you're not into Sega, or if you don't really pay attention to Sega games, it's one of those games that will sneak up on you. That it's
Yep.
like, holy crap, this game is amazing.
Can I talk real quick about Konami? Because that
Yeah,
was
go
one other
for it.
thing I wanted to bring up too.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that a lot of people kind of misconception between Genesis and Super NES is about Konami because a lot of their games like they carry these franchises but they're the same name across both games and they think
Mhm.
or across both consoles and they think that they're the same game. When it comes to Konami, as far as I know, the only game that is similar between the two is going to be the only games plural are going to be Sunset Riders and Ninja Turtles Hyperzone Heist because at its core it's still Turtles in Time, but it's just with some tweaks and some changes. Same thing with Sunset Riders, some tweaks and some changes. That's another case of personally I prefer the Super NES version, but then you get to the ones like Turtles Tournament Fighters and Tiny Toon Adventures, especially is probably the biggest one.
Buster's Hidden
Animaniacs.
Treasure.
I love Buster's Hidden Treasure
Oh,
so
it's so
much.
good.
I
I
love
did
the
an
game
episode
so
on it.
much.
I did
You
a whole
did?
episode. Yeah, I actually
Awesome.
had my buddy Gabe Swore on, who is he's an awesome dude. He works in animation, and so I was trying to pick a game based off of a cartoon since he works in animation, and we picked this one. Actually, the next one I owe him an episode. We're going to do Samurai Pizza Cats. So
Ah.
I gotta watch the show and then I gotta play the game because I promised him we would do that. And it's been like 2 years since I gotta get on that. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. So no, you absolutely should. But yeah, I feel that's another case too. Again, going back to Sparkster, Rocket Knight Adventures. They're two separate
Hmm.
games. So people say, oh, it's just the same. I'm sure it's better in Super NES, right? And it's like sometimes it is, but it's not for the reasons that you think it might be. It's not just because it looks better, it sounds better. No, it's because they're different games. And to
Yeah,
me, I feel Tiny Toon's Buster's Hidden Treasure is much better than Buster Bust Loose. Like there's a lot of Tiny Toons. The sports game is different across both consoles, and it's that unique little thing. And I love that about Konami. Like I love that they went out of their way instead of just porting it. They went out of their way to make unique games for the Genesis, and I was like, that I you love that dedication. And I did want to give a little call out to Konami that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to Sega. Now, when it comes down to the whole debate of what's better, Hyperstone Heist or Turtles in Time, I'll leave you to decide on
Well,
that.
you do bring up something though that I feel like that ties back into the question I asked before, like what's something you wish more people knew about Sega, or maybe an underappreciated aspect of Sega. And in
Mhm.
all honesty, I don't think people appreciate really how much Sega's shakeup of the game industry in the 90s still impacts us today.
I
And
agree.
I say that because people who don't know, like a lot of people who listen to this probably know about game history. I know all my podcasting pals who are into game history know all this stuff, but for the sake of those who haven't heard this stuff yet, but I find it fascinating. Could talk about it for hours and hours. Is just that Nintendo had like an 80+% market share of the video game market prior to the Genesis slash Mega Drive coming onto the market. Like they owned the home console space in North America and the vast majority of the world. I can't speak for Europe, but in Japan and North America, they owned the home console market by like wide margins. And here comes Sega. They already have their Master System, which did fine, but obviously did nowhere near what the NES did. And then you have the Genesis come out, and Sega of America's marketing blitz that people like, that marketing blitz shook up the industry in so many ways. It pried third-party developers away from Nintendo, which was borderline impossible to do because of Nintendo's like crazy archaic and strict licensing agreements and rights that they
Yep.
had been going on. They pried Capcom and Konami slightly away. Like, don't get me wrong, Capcom and Konami still put out a lot of bangers on the Super Nintendo, but if it wasn't for Sega forcing Nintendo to loosen their grip on third-party developers, who knows what would have happened with the PlayStation, that which forced them to loosen their grip even further. If it wasn't for Sega's into pushing Nintendo's button so much, would they have even experimented with disc-based games as early as they did? Because they didn't really up until it took them till after the N64 to get away from cartridges. Would they have gotten away from cartridges even, like, would it have taken longer for them to get away from cartridges if Sega hadn't pushed their buttons in the first place to even seek out Sony and then in turn Philips, and then everything falls apart and creates the PlayStation and all that other stuff? Like, that marketing campaign, that marketing blitz took Nintendo from what, like, well over 80, I think they were even above 90. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was like huge percentage. And then it became more 50-50. Like, that's not just like a small swing. That is a giant swing in terms of a market share.
I mean, they were really the first to come through to give Nintendo a good bloody nose, like in the
Yeah.
competition. They really were. I think because if you look at the different competitions, right? I mean, taking out the fifth generation because that's where Nintendo was kind of out doing their own sort of thing, right? With the Nintendo 64, it's kind of hard
Yeah.
to be like, between PlayStation. Now, I mean, Saturn was obviously distant third, but it's really hard to judge like between PlayStation, like if Sony really did like take it to Nintendo, because by the time they jumped in, they already had way too much of the market by the time they did
Yeah.
that. But when it comes to the eras that you're talking about, yeah, Sega really was the only one to really step it up to Nintendo, and good on them for that. Again, being the pioneer. Once again, it's like they were the pioneer, the first one to be like, okay, we're going to come out with this. We know that there's competition and they're really fierce, but we have a vision and we're going to stick to it. And unfortunately, due to, infighting and other things that happen behind the
Yeah.
scenes, they didn't quite stick the landing. But that's still something that people really need to give Sega the credit for, that it competition, you need that competition.
Hmm.
It's just like you really, really need it. Otherwise, we're just gonna wind up playing the same sort of games and the same sort of things over and over. And just yeah,
Well,
they were the first ones.
and that's why Sega back then was so crazy in a good way. Like, they
Hmm.
needed to be crazy in order to stand out. They had to do weird shit in order to get people to notice them. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And it's unfortunate, like we said before, they were kind of like the authors of their own demise with splitting their market base too much. That's a whole nother conversation. We're focusing more on Genesis specifically, but it's it just I think that's why I wanted to talk about this a little bit more, because the Genesis is just like, this system I think sets up the industry in a lot more ways than people really realize or actively think about. And it's, if it wasn't for this system, if it wasn't for Sega being able to put a stake, like divide the market so much and create essentially, well, that wasn't the first console war. If you technically, that would have been like the Atari and the television and the Odyssey and all that other stuff. But like the real big one that people still talk about to this day, if it wasn't for that, who knows where we'd be?
Yep. Yep. I agree. I agree. Yeah, I just wish that per what you were saying before earlier too about how console wars are still going today. And it's like it's still kind of going today, but it's not without sounding like old person yells at cloud, right? It's just the fun that we had back in the day of the playground debates of like what's better, what do we prefer, Sega versus Nintendo. It's kind of left off, and a lot of it has to do with just mind and mentalities and social media and all that kind of stuff. But we're not going to get into that. It's
Yeah,
more of
social
just
media has made console wars awful.
it really has. And I just wish that it had that same sort of love. Now, granted, when it comes to current consoles, I mean, like I have all three. So it's like, but I mean, I lean towards the Switch just for convenience wise, right? But
Hmm.
like I have all three, and I'm just like, you can. There really isn't a need for the kind of vitriol that we see now. Like back in the day, it was just like, okay, well, I like Nintendo, I like Sega. I had a neighbor who had Nintendo stuff, right?
Hmm.
And so we bantered back and forth, but at the same token, we borrowed each other's games. We hung out. We were just like, hey, I got Sonic, cool. I got Super Mario World, all right. It's like cool. So that we just that's kind of the difference between now and today. Now, granted, I know it's not that easy anymore. I get it, but at the same time, though, I just wish we had that same sort of that fun in that, right?
Allow for, I mean, the problem is that now the internet just makes it way too easy to be a dick. I mean, that's what it
Yeah,
boils down to, but that's another
absolutely.
conversation for another
Another
day.
time,
Oh, we could
right?
go into that. But let's wrap up this episode, man. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a really fun conversation about Sega in general, but also your series, Growing Up Genesis, which I can't wait for people to see on YouTube when you're able to get that over to the channel. But also, even if it takes longer than to get over to the channel after this episode comes out, people can still watch you on your Twitch streams. Doing Growing Up Genesis. So I really hope that people go check that out. So for said people, if they want to check out your streams or your YouTube channel or any of that good stuff, where can the good people find you online, and what do you got to promote?
All right. So, yes, you can find me online at G to the next level, like welcome to the next level, but with a G, like me. That's the spiel. Yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm on Twitch Sundays through Wednesdays. Sundays and Mondays are dedicated to Growing Up Genesis. Sometimes we do it on Tuesdays, depending on schedules, because sometimes I'm out for conventions or something like that, and I don't come back until like Monday night. So that's why sometimes it happens on Tuesdays. I do things outside of Sega as well that are all retro focused. So I have something called Super Power Night where I have random games because I have barely played the Super NES library, right? So I
Mm.
actually have chat send me requests of games to play on Super NES. I put like a small time limit on it. We put in a random wheel and we play multiple games throughout the night. And sometimes we'll do PlayStation, sometimes we'll do TurboGrafx, sometimes we'll do Neo Geo. I recently did Link the Faces of Evil on CDI. That was fun. I'm
You also
actually
played
about to
RZ
do
too.
I did. I loved RZ. I loved RZ. It's such a great game. But yeah, that's basically what I do on Twitch, Sundays through Wednesdays, most of the time at 6 o'clock Central Time start. YouTube, yes, I'm in the midst of doing quite a few things for YouTube. First of all, Sonic Collection update. It's been about 6 years in the making, one out of potentially three. So that's coming up. Of course, the Growing Up Genesis A to Z series is going to be coming up very, very soon. Everlasting, the Evercade, and I'm also doing my level 10 countdown series. I'm also going to be doing something that's been requested for a very, very long time. It is going to be my top 20 best and worst Genesis games. So
Mm.
that's coming out hopefully soon. And as far as anywhere else you can find me, I'm on pretty much every social media. I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Facebook, pretty much everywhere at G to the next level.
All right. So everyone make sure you go check him out in all those locations. Like I've said a bunch of times, I love what you do. I love catching your Twitch streams. And besides the fact that you've been on the show a bunch of times, your streams are just fun for me to go in and chill out. Even if I'm just lurking, it's a nice way to unwind at the end of the day. So
I
everyone,
appreciate it. I
it,
absolutely appreciate that.
it's good vibes, man. Even when I can tell sometimes, like when you've had a rough day, you never like. I like that you're honest about it, but you still have chill vibes the whole time. It's a good time.
Well, thank you, thank you. That's really what it's all about for me. Just having a good chill time, cozy. That's what a lot of people say. It's like you have like some of the coziest vibes and streams because I
Yeah.
want to be inviting to everybody, right? It's again per what you say, as long as you're not a dick. Like, I want to be
Yep.
invited to everybody, right? So, but yeah, that's basically how it is. And at the end of the day, like I love to entertain, but I also love to educate as well. I feel like if we're having a great time and we're finding out new things and we're learning new things, that's the best it could be. So yeah.
That's what I try to do with this show as well. Just like most like fun conversation, but digestible video game history is kind of how I describe the show. Even though my episodes are long as shit, so sometimes it's not that digestible. But in terms of like, it's not like going into the hyper fixated focus of like pushing up your glasses and be like, well, the MMC3 chip of the NES could do like going into all that.
Oh, see, I
Uh,
can't do that. That's outside
I
my
I've
scope.
done I've done little bits on the page on my Patreon for like tiny little bonus stuff, but they're like 15-20 minute episodes. So it is very bite size for that type of stuff. But that leads me into my own spiel. For myself, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram at Still Loading Pod, Twitch at Still Loading Pod as well. I do stream usually every Tuesday night and Saturday night, but a lot of times it gets switched up due to podcast recording. Actually, for example, this weekend, not streaming Saturday night because I'm guesting on another show. I'll be streaming Sunday night. But yes, every Tuesday and Saturday night, usually at 8 p.m. Eastern, at Still Loading Podcast on YouTube, which actually, I mean, I mean, at the time this is out, it'll be a month later. I just recently added the show to YouTube Music, which had a whole bunch
Nice.
of other shenanigans behind the scenes, but that's not important. It's up there now, though. So, it's all over on YouTube Music at Still Loading Podcast over on YouTube. If you would like to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on whichever podcasting app you choose. That helps more people find the show, and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support the show over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. A ton of extra perks there. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, as well as patron voting rights for quarterly polls and whatever polls I feel like throwing up in the meantime. For $3 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned prior, plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get all the lower tiers plus 2 mini bonus episodes, which I mentioned just a little bit ago. That's where I kind of do some deep dives, also some fun stuff. And then for $5 a month, you get everything I've mentioned, plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which will be changing names actually kind of soon, but this one currently is called Still Bonding, which is my James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. So that's all over patreon.com/stillloadingpod. Lots of extra goodies for you. And, so if you think about it, for $5 a month, you get Still Bonding, which those episodes are 2.5 to 4.5 hours, depending on the movie. You get 2 mini bonus episodes that are 15 to 20 minutes, plus the voting rights, plus early access, plus patron roles in Discord. So all that good stuff for $5 a month. So patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But that is all the time I have for you today. That's all I got for this episode. G, thank you once again for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me. And once again, it was a blast.
Always a pleasure having you on, my friend. And when I do that Sega Pico episode, I will reach out to you again.
Heck yeah. Let's do it.
So with all that said, listeners, thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.